Okay, good evening. It's 7 o'clock. Welcome to our January 14th special meeting of the Town Council. Can we have a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syock.
Here.
Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. Would you all join me in the pledge? I'll explain more about tonight's meeting and the parameters and the goals in a minute, but we do, even though we're not in a normal meeting tonight, we do have an opportunity for verbal communications. Since we're considering our overall strategic goals, it's hard for me to imagine that there's something not covered by tonight's agenda, but if you'd like to speak on something that is not on our agenda, now is your opportunity. Okay, seeing no one. Before I begin, the town has just tonight launched something that I think is pretty exciting, and I wanted to give our town manager, Laura Pavetti, a chance to explain it to those of you who are here and might be watching.
Thank you, Mayor. The slide is coming up on the screen for all of you to see. Today, the town launched a community budget survey. This is intended to allow all community residents, including property owners and others, to essentially provide their priorities and rank order of different services and projects within the town of Los Gatos. This is an initial budget survey. We posted it this afternoon, and we already started receiving responses, so it appears to be a very popular item. We hope to provide some initial top-line results for next week's council meeting when you will be considering the 5-year forecast and budget direction. But we encourage everyone in the audience and who's watching either online or television to go to the surveymonkey.com post that's on the screen. You can also access this directly through what's new on the town's website or the financial transparency page, and we encourage everyone to fill it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavetti, and I hope those of you that are here, I know that a lot of you are interested in budgeting items, but this is exciting. Thank you, staff, for moving forward with our first phase of community budgeting. We hope to make it more detailed and interesting and participatory as we go forward. That's a good segue into what tonight is and what tonight isn't. Tonight is not a budgeting meeting. What we're doing tonight, if you will, is establishing a framework or a 30,000-foot look at priorities, which will inform our budget process, which begins next week. So as the council considers the items, we're not looking for particular line items, we're not looking for dollar amounts. What we're looking for, as the staff report indicates, is to reaffirm priorities going forward or jettison them. We have some suggestions for 3 new priorities, but council obviously is welcome to offer others. But I would ask everybody in the audience and on council to remember that what we're doing is not budgeting tonight, but what we're doing is establishing a process and priorities, if you will, an outline, which will inform our budgeting process, which formally begins next week. So that said, I'll look to the staff for a quick presentation on what we're doing this evening.
Thank you, and if I could ask Mr. Andrews to post the strategic priorities exhibit that was included in the staff report. As noted in the staff report, the town provides high-quality municipal services in a number of strategic areas. Those address community character, good governance, financial management, civic enrichment, public safety, and quality public infrastructure. These goals have been affirmed by councils in the past and continue to be represented with our past budgets, including the budget that we are currently operating under. As noted on the slide on the screen, we have a number of ongoing priorities that are actually very, excuse me, complex issues that can't be solved with quick one-off actions. So the first one on the list is traffic and transportation. We just completed a parking study, a comprehensive parking study that laid out a number of action items, and we hope that we'll be able to start implementing that parking study. We're also underway with several parking demand management issues, and again, these are not quick issues that just get solved and then they go away. Some of them require iterations and learning and trying new things. Quality of life continues to be key for Los Gatos. We are underway with our comprehensive general plan update, which is providing a vision to the year 2040. In addition, we are working on community vitality, and you will see on the ordinance list, we believe that with our recent experience with events provided by our nonprofits, that there's some retooling we can do to make that ordinance a little bit more user-friendly. So that is up for your consideration. We also continue to look at economic vitality and how we can continue to promote the businesses within Los Gatos and get vacancies filled, so that remains an existing strategic priority. Safety is a very large priority. Clearly, we are very much engaged with fire protection. Next week, you will be considering a draft ordinance that actually affects 3 main sections of the code to make sure that we are addressing fire protection in a comprehensive way, and based on council's action, that would then lead to community outreach. And then prudent fiscal management is an ongoing priority. As you know, the council has set aside over $8 million to help pay off some of our pension debt. We know that there are other opportunities for council to do more, and so continuing to be mindful of our finances is really important. The ideas that staff have come up with are really threefold, and again, council has the discretion to, you don't need to agree with these. But first of all, of course, we are in the process of doing our RHNA work, our regional housing needs allocation process. Later on this year, a methodology will be developed by the regional agencies. I'm hopeful that our town council will weigh in on that methodology and provide comments. We are working in collaboration with the Cities Association to make sure that our voice is heard, and we are hopeful that this work can continue. In addition, once the methodology is set, we will need to update our housing element, and that needs to be adopted by the end of 2020. So we're raring to go in terms of how we meet the need for housing in our community, and again, I think this is a key priority. Related is, of course, the new state laws that the governor has signed, and in your ordinance list, the town attorney will identify some of those key ordinances that we need to adopt in order to align with those priorities. And then Parks and Public Works continues to spend a fair amount of time monitoring regional transportation efforts, whether it's proposed ballot measures or the implementation of Measure B. And so again, we want to make sure that we are effective participants in those discussions. And because of our limited staff capacity, since we're so busy providing day-to-day services, police, fixing potholes, trimming trees, et cetera, we believe that we have some capacity to add a few new things, but we want to be mindful that we want to be able to accomplish things. And you will see on the chart the accomplishments that we've had to date. So with that, as the mayor said, this is really intended to reaffirm our strategic priorities, the ongoing priorities identified, to modify or agree with the proposed anticipated new, and then to help us prioritize the ordinances so we know what our policy work is ahead of us. And all of this will help inform the upcoming budget process. And with that, I'll turn it over to the town attorney to provide a little bit of context to the ordinances. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Attached to the staff report is my memo that I've done the past 4 years. It started 4 years ago, and I think it's a good tool that we use to kind of focus where our strategies is and what we'll be doing during this next coming year. There's 17 ordinances on there. They start out with the first 3 or 4 of those are really state mandated ones that we have to do, as the town manager mentioned. And so they're the best that the town staff has put forward on what we think the priorities are. They certainly could be rearranged if you feel there should be some that should be a higher priority and should be worked on earlier in the year. And also, during the year, there always is some things that come up from the state that require us to reevaluate it and possibly make changes to it. The only comment that I would have is under number 9, which is the term limits and Finance Commission ordinance. Just one error in that I state that they need approximately 3,000 signatures, and it's actually 2,000. The 3,000 is what would be needed if it was a special election, but because these are going to be in November, they need 2,000 signatures in order to qualify. And then the other part of that paragraph, we talk about whether the council at some point in time would have a staff report come forward to you to talk about what your options are if they do qualify. And I do have language in there that sometimes council does do a competing ordinance, and I use the word for a less extreme approach. I was primarily talking about the Finance Commission for that one as opposed to the term limit. The term limit I certainly is pretty standard and isn't considered an extreme measure, but certainly I, at least from my standpoint, I consider the Finance Committee an extreme initiative, and that's a possibility council could look at. But I just wanted to clarify that because I received a couple of comments about the language that I used in that. But besides for that, some of these are still left over from last year. I would comment that typically in my 32 years of this, 8 to 10 ordinances is what you can accomplish. We actually accomplished last year 21 ordinances. You adopted 21, which I don't believe I've ever seen that done in my career. So I don't think we can get all of these done, but we certainly will just, go through them methodically and get them to you as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you very much. Does council have questions for Ms. Pravetti, or Mr. Schultz, or other staff that's here tonight? Thank you very much for being here. Mr. Rennie.
So I would be interested in understanding what the sort of extraordinary things are that are going on in some of the main departments. I don't know if tonight's the best time to ask that or next time. I'm really looking for a qualitative feel for like what's the big things that Parks and Public Works is planning this year. In the past, it's been Almond Grove. We knew that was taking a lot of their time. Is the North 40 going to be taking a lot of their time? I know they've got a lot of grants going on, but I think there's, the main work for the result of those grants is probably not going to happen this year. So I wanted to get a feel for, probably with Parks and Public Works and the town manager's office and I think the town attorney, I'd be curious too, are we finished with any lawsuits? Just to get a feel for, how full is each department with kind of the extraordinary things. Not, I don't need to know the day-to-day trimming trees and so forth. Is now an appropriate time to ask those questions?
It's probably a better discussion for next week, but just to give you a high level, on the chart that's up on the screen, you'll notice that there's a number of efforts in progress. So clearly the general plan update is something that consumes the time of all town departments and all boards and commissions. So that is a huge work effort. We hope to conclude in 2020, so that way we can have some capacity to do the implementation of the general plan. Vehicle miles traveled is a Parks and Public Works effort, and this spring we'll be bringing several action items for council consideration. So that is built into the budget, and we've already had one study session on this. We are working on the ordinances to streamline items for business. These were considered by Planning Commission, and they're ready for council consideration in February. So again, that consumes town manager's office, CDD, and the town attorney. The school bus pilot continues. That is a huge work effort in addition to finding grant funds and preparing for Measure B. So I'd say, having the parking study completed, where you are actually internally having the conversation as to which department should best carry the implementation of the parking study, and we'll be better able to answer that as well. The town manager's office remains focused on emergency preparedness, as evidenced by the wildfire protection ordinances you'll be considering next week. We're also updating our websites to make them more user-friendly for residents who wish to create defensible spaces and have some tools and techniques as to how to do that. And then we're also preparing to improve our emergency operations center so that in the event of a disaster, we're able to best serve the community. So those are just some high-level things. They're already in the budget, they're underway, but they do take a fair amount of time.
And so how about the North 40? Do we expect that to take a lot of Parks and Public Works time and CDD?
Well, again, we've approved contracts to assist with the evaluation of plan review. We've got consultants helping us with the engineering review as well as the building plans and also with inspection. But it does take staff engaged in North 40. And this is a very big development for our town that will take a number of years to complete. And we understand from the developer that they're slowing down the progress on the construction, so that means it's going to take a little bit more of staff's capacity over several years.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so I'm going to move on to public comment. Just a reminder that when you come up, you have 3 minutes. And don't run away right away because somebody may have a question for you. The first speaker is Rob Stump.
First, I want to say thank you to the town and especially Arne Andrews and his team for the focus they continue to have on wildfire prevention and preparation. They are making a difference. And second, I want to make it clear I'm not here to complain tonight. This is not about complaint, it's about priorities. And I want to raise some of those to the top again. So I'm here to really request more focus and funding priority to address the most serious public safety issue we face in this community, and it's wildfire. Tonight, my comments are specifically focused on the very high fire hazard zone. Let me preface by saying to you that public safety needs to be elevated in our community. I'm kind of hoping that safety will actually go to the top of the list here instead of being number 3. It is the biggest single safety concern in our community. We are at a high risk. I think some of you are aware of the study that was put out several years ago and then refreshed. It said, where will the West's next deadly wildfire strike? The risks are everywhere. As it turned out, Los Gatos was rated higher as a fire risk than Paradise prior to the fire in Paradise. We are way up on the scale. A wildfire of the type and ferocity of Paradise could literally clear our hillside in an hour. At a point in time, it was moving at 100 yards per second in Paradise. You can do the calculation probably yourself. So what I'd like to do is just review some key items and just for emphasis on things we need to take a look at. We do have the Santa Clara County Community Wildfire Protection Plan. Awesome. Let's act on it. Let's get the community involved. Evacuation. We've got to address the feeder streets that are the points of egress out of the hillside communities. We've got to provide minimum of 20 feet of clearance for fire trucks and emergency vehicles, particularly during wildfire season. And maybe that's one of the ways we attack it. It's during wildfire season. We need to install a wildfire siren system on the hill. Cell phones are great, but they don't always work. You're familiar with the tsunami sirens in Hawaii? It goes off, people go to higher ground. They go off in this hillside, you get out of the hills. Something to consider. Defensible space. I'm hopeful that next week we will be adopting an enhanced definition around defensible space that says it's 100 feet regardless of property line. Wildfire does not stop at property lines. Vegetation management, we need enhanced vegetation management. In these areas that I described, we need to have modified fuel shaded fuel breaks. We need to get on that. We need to get to a baseline. We've got to install fire hydrants where there aren't any today. We've got to work with communities, groups that have private fire hydrants, mutual water companies. Maybe they should be transitioned out. Are we prepared for wildfire? The answer is no. There's much more that we need to do to get our community house in order. Funds need to be allocated and into matters of public safety. We do need to deal with this risk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stump. Are there any questions? Just for everybody out there and for you, those bullets, don't indicate an order. They just indicate
Yeah,
what's up there.
I understand, but sometimes it does
I
have,
respect that, but I was just
it does
wanted to
have
let you know.
meaning, right?
Thank you very much. David Weissman? If you want to change that, you can change it. The overhead, or you have a presentation? Okay.
I'm still in training.
That's got it, okay. Thanks. As outlined in my packet letter, your attachment 5, this council approved the Greenridge Terrace 8-lot subdivision in April 2019. In September 2019, in the absence of any A&S applications or permits, 17 trees were severely and illegally pruned, all in an effort to improve visibility of the valley from 2 undeveloped home sites, and to help justify the $16 million asking price for this property's new Zillow listing. One picture is worth 1,000 words. And so here are some of the photos. This is the view of the site before there were any violations. This is afterwards. You can see what they've done. Now you can see the valley. So you've taken and increased the value of this property. I'm not sure how much, but certainly $50,000, $100,000. You can see here, more of the trees limbed up to 20, 30 feet, and you can see all the vegetation on the ground. This tree had 3 trunks, 3 major trunks. 2 of them are now gone. The town's fine for this destruction was $300 total, which doesn't even cover staff's time. I met with staff in January and was told that nothing more in the way of fines or penalties could be imposed under the current tree ordinance or fee schedule, all of which I find insulting given all the effort and time that went into the 2 previous tree ordinance revisions in 2005 and 2016, both of which I was an active member. Something must be done to fix this problem before the next hillside property is similarly trashed. I ask that this claimed lack of enforcement power be quickly addressed, because after what has happened so far, I can only imagine that the property owners of Greenridge Terrace are kicking themselves for not trimming 100 trees instead of just 17, since they would still face the same fine of $300. If the penalty doesn't fit the violation, then there is no deterrence. I think it's now open season on the town's hillside trees.
Okay, Dr. Weissman, just to be clear, the priority that you're suggesting is to add a modification or amendment to the tree ordinance to the ordinance list?
What I'm suggesting is that we get together with the town attorney and give the wording in the tree ordinance and the fee schedule so that when violations like this occur, the town attorney feels confident and assured that he can level fines that are commensurate with these violations and which will act as a deterrent.
Okay, other questions for Dr.
I
Weissman?
do have
Yes,
one.
Mr. Rennie?
The first thing that came to my mind was, you're more familiar than I with the viewing platforms, but this would now make homes visible and the sites less desirable. Is that not true?
I think most people
We go through a
that-
lot of trouble to try to screen, and then they just took all the screen away. I'm not understanding this move.
They did. But I think most people that live in the hillsides want to have the view, and not just of trees. I think we've seen this all the
But
time.
we might not let them build a house because it's going to be too visible.
Well, no, they can still build a house. It's a legal lot now. You've accomplished that. What they may be prohibited from doing is instead of having 2 stories, they may have to go to 1 story. But they can still build their 6,000 square feet. They just can't do 2 stories.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Susan Fish.
resident of Greenridge Terrace, and I'm both frustrated and angry. To follow Dr. Weissman, I'm frustrated because this is not the first time that trees have been butchered, that illegal grading has been done by not only this developers, but others in the past. We've called code enforcement officers, we've notified the town, we've even called the police department, and yet finally they're caught. Finally, they have to come forth and a violation was issued. I'm angry because I followed the rules. I'm bringing you my application for tree removal and/or pruning permit that I applied for in September of 2018. Not for a majestic oak, but for a pine tree I planted 50 years ago that, in reaching for the sun, leaned over Greenridge Terrace and was a threat to actually fall on cars. This application permit, along with my arborist, meeting with the town arborist, and having to put in 3 replacement specimen trees, cost me $3,000. And yet they can butcher 17 trees and pay a fine of $300. What message does that send? Back in the 70s, all the surrounding municipalities had this running comment that, well, it seems like Los Gatos cares about trees more than it cares about people. That clearly is not the case today. There has to be something that will cause these developers not to do this to our neighborhoods, not to do this to our properties, and what we have is clearly a joke. I ask and support Dr. Weissman's suggestion that there be some teeth in this. There's 17 trees. Even if they followed the rules, for, as I did, that would be $51,000. $300? That sends such a terrible message. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Fish? Thank you. Mr. Andrews is holding on to a card that's from Lee Fagot. Mr. Fagot, would you like to speak?
Good evening. A couple of things, but first, thank you for all that was accomplished in this last year. The town did a lot besides delivering a normal level of quality service to the community. You did a few other things. The school bus program, I think, was an interesting initiative, a good experiment, if you will. The other experiment, of course, was what was done on Santa Cruz Avenue and what is being done with the bump outs that now. Again, a lot of good movement in the right direction. Thank you. Going forward, let's look at some other things that could be done. This council, the staff, and the town overall, us taxpayers have benefited with well-qualified volunteers on the town's finance committee. They have made a significant contribution to the education of the community, the council, and they're an auxiliary to the town staff, as was pointed out when one of the council members and I had a discussion at this same setting, that they are a resource that is volunteers helping the community, helping the town staff to deliver on those services. Now let's move further and develop this resource by adding 2 more very well qualified citizens, I'm not one, to change the charter for the Finance Committee to a commission. Let the citizens have voting rights on that commission. Let them continue to be a resource for the town staff to help them, as well as the council, and let's work through the financial issues that are challenging the town going forward. Let's give those citizens voting rights on that commission so that they can help provide the right kind of direction and guidance to the council to help make better financial decisions going forward. Also, I would like to see the town itself communicate better in the community. Let's provide, following many of the committee meetings, on the town's website, put the audio recordings out on that website so that citizens can listen. If they can't attend the meeting, they can listen to those audio tapes and get a better sense of what was really discussed in detail. That would be very, very helpful so that we're prepared for the next time that the meeting occurs to come with information. And last, of course, is let's pay more into CalPERS. Having the money sit, we've made some contributions to CalPERS this year. That was good, a little more than it has been done in the past in terms of extraordinary payments. But we're still sitting on reserves way above the 25% minimum for emergencies that could be put into CalPERS that's going to earn us better returns.
Okay, you have at least one question. Ms. Sayak?
So, Mr. Fago, communicate better. You had a suggestion, and so I wanted to follow up on that, and it was to put the tapes immediately after meetings. Are you referring to different tapes than what's currently on our website?
The website has the audio tape, the videotapes of the council meetings, but some of the committee meetings are all recorded. All the committee meetings, I believe, are recorded. But those audio tapes are not available on the town's website, or at least if they are, I haven't been able to find them.
So
that's
just
what
want to
I'm
clarify,
asking.
you're talking about all committees beyond council and planning commission?
That is correct.
Okay.
Because it's a great resource to learn better what's being discussed in more detail so that the community can be better prepared to participate in the future.
Mr. Rennie?
So, Mr. Fago, my question was, the Finance Committee, so you're looking for a Finance Commission that's only citizens. Would we be getting rid of the Finance Committee that has a mix of council and citizens? So you said that was a good opportunity for council members to learn from the citizens, but you're talking about getting rid of that now. Getting rid of a mixed committee.
I think having a commission and a committee,
A mixed committee or just the old-style committee with just council members?
or change the committee so that the citizens on that, the 3 citizens, have voting rights.
And then not do an all-citizens commission?
If you left the 2 committee, the 2 council members on that committee, and then also gave the 3 citizens voting rights, then there would be 5 voting members. I think that would be perhaps, let's try that for a year and see how it works.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Fago, I heard you, what I thought I heard you doing was advocating for the petition that's out for a ballot measure to create a finance commission. Is that what you are talking about? Or are you talking about a priority for the town to implement some kind of ordinance, or are you advocating for the town to change the charter for the existing finance committee?
I'm advocating tonight for a change to the current charter so that the citizens, the 3 citizens, have voting rights on that committee. If that can't be done, then let's go 5 citizens on a commission, all 5 have voting rights. That would be what the petition is that's going around the town now. And why not?
And you answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Other questions for Mr. Fago? Thank you. Joanne Justice?
Good evening. I'm glad to be here. I'm a resident of Blossom Hill Road.
Can you pull that mic a little bit closer to you so we can hear you?
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Great.
I'm a resident of Blossom Hill Road. I live directly across the street from the school. This has become a racetrack. It is dangerous to be in the driveway, to try to park, to back out into the lane because you're going into a lane. I want to show you a picture of a parker. Someone parked an RV next to
You can
my
actually
driveway.
put that on the overhead so everybody can see it. Mr. Andrews can help you.
Yeah, there's 2 of them. Anyway, the RV was parked next to my driveway, and there was another car on the other side. I have to drive into the lane, go around the RV, and I can't see around the block, so I don't know how fast a car is coming or if I'm going to get hit. It's not if I get hit, it's when I get hit. And I don't understand why. I've called the town before, and they told me that there's a state law about 25 miles an hour. It has to be before the school, around the school. Well, you took good care of Dave's Avenue, Louise Van Meter, and you did a hell of a great job with Raymond J. Fisher, how you've reconfigured the street. However, Blossom Hill Road, I know this is not a new topic. My son lived there for 12 years. They've asked for permit parking. They can't seem to get an answer anywhere, and we haven't seen any changes. And I've been there since last year, and I'm really concerned about the next picture. Oh. Thank you. This pole light is at 937 Blossom Hill Road. I live right next door. That's where the man was killed, right by this light. The flashing light hadn't been working. It's now working. It says school on there, but not 25 miles an hour. And the other day, my neighbor was going across the crosswalk, and the car came so fast, the guy flipped her off because he couldn't stop. So I'm telling you, this is not working, and this is not a new subject because you've known about it, or people prior to you have known about it. I've even sent you, Marcia, an email regarding this, and it's not acceptable anymore. It's a matter of who's going to get hit next, or do you have to wait for a lawsuit before you make a change? I know you have budget because you have completely resurfaced the beautiful neighborhoods in downtown Los Gatos, and it's cement and not asphalt. So I have to think that you had a budget somewhere along the way, so it's a priority. We're asking for a priority, and the neighbors are getting together and organizing to see what can happen. I understand from Lisa Reynolds, she sent me an email yesterday. She's the principal of Blossom Hill School. She said she's working with the town. So I don't know what's transpired, what she's doing, if it's the beginning stages, but she's out there every day and she's concerned about the speed as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if you have a question. I have a question for you, actually. Keeping in mind that what we're doing is setting large, big picture priorities. So I hear two priorities from you. One, people go too fast. So either you want the town to consider looking at changing the speed limit, which would be an ordinance, and two, you're concerned about parking on your street. So are you more concerned with parking, or are you more concerned with speed?
Both.
Okay, and so your priority suggestion is permit parking and reduce speed?
Yes.
How would you feel about, given that the two blocks that are where you are the only place in that whole area that has parking at all on street on Blossom Hill? What would you think about no parking there?
That doesn't work because then no one can come and visit. And the problem is, and here's the thing I found out the other day when I called the police, they only have one staff member between Los Gatos and Monte Sereno to ticket abandoned cars. There's been a vehicle, not even a vehicle, on our street for well over a month. And I've called 7 times, and they said, I'm sorry, we're short-staffed. I don't think that is acceptable to me. It's a safety issue of driving backwards, having to go around a vehicle and a vehicle here, and how fast these cars are coming. Now, someone told me the other day, why don't you just move? That's not the solution. The solution is reduce the speed or monitor it with cops or whatever you need to do. But this is not working anymore. And that gentleman who passed, who was killed, this is not an accident. It was a fatality. He was in the pedestrian lane. He was on the side, parked on the side. Now, we don't know all the details yet. But for the damage that was done, from what I have been told by professional people, maybe speed was involved.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Lee Quintana.
Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. You have my letter, and I don't cover it, something in it, and you have questions for me, please ask me. But my main points tonight that I'll do verbally involve improving community involvement and transparency. And I say that because we've had several projects come before the council and the commission lately where the public has stated that they didn't get involved in the discussion until the very end after plans and reports had been completed. My suggestion to improve both transparency and involvement is to expand the general plan committee to include not just review of general plan amendments, but zoning amendments and other amendments to policies and planning documents, and to include changes for design and architectural policies and standards. This would be combining the Architectural Standards and Hillside Committee that used to function as a committee but no longer does, and would revert the existing General Plan Committee back to its past function where it reviewed more than just general plan amendments currently, except for the fact that the General Plan Committee was expanded to include additional persons because of the general plan update. Other than that, the General Plan Committee had not met for approximately 2 years. And it seems useless to have a committee that is not working. Besides that, people who are involved in committees are more likely to be involved in the town in general. And if you're on a committee that doesn't meet, why be on it? So that's one of my things. The second thing was already mentioned by Lee Farrow, and that is the question of audio recordings of meetings that are not videotaped. They are currently, I believe, done for most of the committees that are not videotaped, but they are not generally available to the public. They are used simply to do action minutes, and then I don't know what happens to them, but a couple of times I try to get them. Once I was able to because I happened to ask the day after, and they hadn't gotten rid of them yet. I think it's important that those records be available, especially for people on committees like the General Plan Advisory Committee. If you miss a meeting, you're missing a lot of information, and you're not getting it just from action minutes because there aren't very many actions taken. The last, since I'm rushed for time, the last thing I'm going to say is that people tonight have brought up fire safety, defensible space, trees that are being taken out, views of the hillside. These are all things, and the hillside standards and guidelines in general, these all play into one another, and they have inherent conflicts. And my request is that in developing all these various items, that we come up with something that there aren't conflicts between, but they all work together. I have 11 seconds.
How are you? Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Quintana? Thank you. Catherine Summers.
Good evening, Council. I'm Catherine Summers with Executive Director at the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce. And as usual, I have a lot of priorities. But I do want to start with thanking you for a great 2019. Our chamber, which is almost 400 members strong now, has expressed that they would like to stay on the same path that we're on right now. I know we push you sometimes kind of hard, but I think we're making some progress. The initiatives and the streamlining of the processes that Attorney Schultz referred to, those 21, have been really useful and beneficial, and I hope that the council will prioritize those and will extend those. As we head into 2020, we're really adamant about following the instructions and the suggestions of the parking consultant. It's been 20 years, I think, that we've been looking at parking. I think her suggestions are fantastic, and I really hope that you will consider those and that we'll do them in those stages that she suggested. Transportation, of course, goes without saying. Let's try to get ahead of summer 2020. We still have time. Let's look at the trolley. Let's look at a comprehensive streetscape, even if it might mean hiring an architect, a urban planning architect who will come in and really look at those streets. I think it might be useful dollars. When we head into the ordinances that is in the memo from Attorney Schultz, I love the special events ordinance, of course. I also wanted to make sure that we look at event signage. lights and lighting all over. I think that actually has maybe been addressed, but I'm not sure we actually passed that. And then I also wanted to look at the building department and making sure that they have an appropriate number of staff people to really handle all of the applications and the TI applications that are coming in, because I think we have a lot of building that's going on downtown, on Shannon Avenue, out in the North 40. So I think that is something that we really should look at. And lastly, because we do have a lot of events, I am hoping that, and I've been meeting with a lot of the stakeholders on Los Gatos Boulevard and in the downtown, and we're planning a series of summer events. So I hope that you will look at those favorably and know that last year we made, I think they were a great community building, and I hope that you will consider helping us again this year and making those even more special than they were. That's it. Finished.
And you have time, too. Are there any questions for Ms. Summers? Thank you very much. Lisa Wade.
My name is Lisa Wade, and I live at 16363 Lilac Lane, Los Gatos. On behalf of our Green Monday group and the larger community, we'd like to thank the Town Council for addressing the climate crisis and adopting the Green Monday resolution. You have heard the concerns of residents and have responded in a way that will contribute to a brighter future for all our children, and we commend you for that. Green Monday volunteers are a dedicated and passionate group. We are excited to work with the town and are willing to volunteer to make this an effective program. However, we know that our hard work and the work of Green Monday as a nonprofit organization could be greatly amplified if the Town Council would be willing to put some resources, such as staff time and funding, into the promotion of plant-based eating in Los Gatos. The City of Mountain View found the promotion of plant-based eating to be the most cost-effective way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They have allocated at least $30,000 to promote plant-based eating in Mountain View. We are asking Los Gatos, as a forward-thinking community, to allocate some staff time and funding to follow through on the resolution. And whatever is spent, even if it's not as much as our group would wish, will go a long way and will also help to revitalize the town. In terms of the town identifying new strategic priorities, we would like to suggest the following programs to bring the Green Monday resolution to life. 1, we would like the council to provide support and encouragement for restaurants serving plant-based foods. In addition to the town issuing Green Monday certificates to restaurants offering vegan items on their menus, as resolved in the Green Monday resolution, we ask that the town display the names of restaurants with Green Monday certificates and how to apply for a Green Monday certificate on the town website. 2, we ask the town to play a role in educating the public on the importance of plant-based eating as a powerful way to address the climate crisis. Our group has put a lot of thought into this, what this might look like, and we would like to ask the town to allocate some funding for education. Perhaps this could take the form of banners, flyers, or other kinds of advertising to educate the public about the environmental benefits of meat reduction. Maybe it could be a town-sponsored or town-endorsed event with speakers or documentaries. Perhaps it could be a food tasting event. Our group is prepared to work with the town to effect these programs, which will benefit the community as a whole and bring Los Gatos closer to reaching its goals for sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. Any questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. I have no other cards. Going, gone. Public hearing is closed. I'll look to the council at this time just for any questions that may have arisen during the presentations for staff. Ms. Sayak.
Okay, I have 3, if that's okay, Madam Mayor. The first one for Mr. Schultz. This discussion on compliance and the fee schedule, is that an ordinance that we update? Is that an ordinance one question, and then is that, if not, is that something that we update yearly as part of our fee schedule?
Is this in regards to the tree issue?
Yes.
So our tree protection ordinance does not have an enforcement and civil penalties section in it. It's devoid of that. So we do fall back on our standard fee schedule, which has $100 for first violation, $250 for the second, and third is $500. As I mentioned to one of the speakers, is yes, it should be looked at, and we should have a separate section in the ordinance that deals with exactly what happens with violations, because it's so much different than any other code section, say, for example, unregistered vehicle or other ones that you're used to. So we do need to have a section in there. It could be addressed while we're doing the tree protection ordinance right now, if that's possible. It might be coming too soon to try to put that in, but it certainly could be added to the list to put that section in there, because it does need to be dealt with. Because in addition, it talks more about civil penalties, meaning that you have to actually sue in court to even get the penalty. So there's some issues that have come up with any ordinance, and I'd remind council, the special events permit ordinance is on the list, because every time you do a new ordinance or you make changes to an ordinance, it's good practice to bring it back in 2 or 3 years, just because there are things that you didn't see. The other thing I would point out to that although they were only fined $300, they still have to come in and obtain the permit and pay the permit fee. Plus, since they did work without a permit, it is 1.5 those times. And there are tree replacements, and there are other things that do occur with the arborist report. So there's additional cost to that property owner. But I also understand where the speakers are coming from, and that there appears to be not enough teeth in our ordinance. So that could be added to it.
My second question, Mr. Morley, I believe, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, that changing speed limits is something more than an ordinance. And so if you could just walk us through, is it simply an ordinance that we can use on a priority list, or is it something that's more involved?
So speed limits are set through, by state law, through a speed survey. The speed survey is done on a fairly regular basis. And matter of fact, we do have some that are coming up this year. Some streets where we'll be doing that speed survey. The speed is set by the 85th percentile of the speeds on that roadway. So the speed survey tells us what the speeds are, and then at the 85th percentile is where the speed limit is set. So that it's a calculation, a math exercise essentially, and it's done again by state law. So there's a little discretion that the town has there.
And then a follow-up of that, if we're hoping, due to safety concerns, to bring it down, is there anything to do to bring it down before you do that survey? Because otherwise, you're going to get the 85th percentile of a speed you don't like.
Yeah, I think you nailed it exactly, especially on a road that was designed as a big road, as a road that was meant to carry traffic. The speeds are going to be a little bit higher now. That's where we get into some of our capital improvements, where we look at traffic calming, similar to what we did on the other side of Blossom Hill Road, where we have a lot of kids who are going to Fisher School, where we dropped a lane and added the green bike lanes with the separated bike lanes. So that was meant to do a couple things, including adding the buffer, but also helping to reduce speeds a little bit on that stretch. So that's something that if it was the council's desire, we could take a look at through our capital program, or as a priority that you would set for us.
Okay, and then my next question, since we're just focusing on questions, is Ms. Pravetti and Mr. Paulson. So the general plan, it's a large effort. And so I'm just trying to think forward of our efforts to identify changes in the general plan, potential zoning requirements that may have to happen, and then just state laws that are looking at increasing density. So I'd like some advice on how to create a priority that looks beyond the general plan, but really identifies where are appropriate sites, because we can assume that the regional housing number we're going to get is going to double. And so immediately I think of, is this opportunity for Los Gatos Boulevard plan to be updated to accommodate any zoning changes? But that's where I'd like some discussion from you and others on how do we incorporate that into a priority, knowing that we have to actually look forward this year.
Okay, so currently, the General Plan Update Advisory Committee is working through potential land use alternatives for the general plan update, and they recognize very clearly that the state is going to expect Los Gatos to plan for significantly higher numbers of housing than we ever have in the past. So the working number that we're discussing is about 2,000 new housing units. And on Thursday, the community is welcome to join us, I believe, at the Jewish Community Center. Or Fisher Middle School, to discuss the alternatives and provide input on exactly what you say. Where are the right places for increased housing, either in terms of heights or density, different kinds of housing types, et cetera. So the community has direct input now as we do this, and then the committee will be meeting later on in January to consider that community input and start working towards its own recommendation for Planning Commission and Town Council. So actually this spring, the council will be discussing land use alternatives that do move the needle to meet our needs for all segments of the community. And I'll ask Director Paulson to add any other depth. Thank you.
Just one other comment in that we really need to get through the general plan effort, and then those other items, whether it's updating the zoning ordinance, I think that was requested, we're going to have to do zoning ordinance updates, the Boulevard plan, any of our other policy documents, those could be action items in the general plan, and so those don't necessarily have to rise to the level of priorities for this setting, but as Ms. Privetti mentioned, the council will have an opportunity to discuss that specific topic of housing coming up here in a couple months.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Rennie?
Okay, this is probably a tough one. So many of our community believe that we are in a climate emergency, and it's been quite a while since I've seen anything on the goals dealing with, I think we used to call it sustainability plan. The word these days is climate action plans. It just feels like we should have a goal on here that goes to the climate action plan. I know other cities like Sunnyvale have completed their climate action playbook. Big documents. I'm not suggesting maybe that's something we do soon. My question for you, though, is I know we have things we've been doing. What are those, and can we add to them? Can we add a goal on here? You know, I know that we don't have a department that really addresses this now. We spread it across everywhere. It would probably get stuck in the town manager's office, and probably fire protection is maybe more important, depends on your opinion, Mr. Stump. What's going on now, and is there any possibility of adding something to this list?
So as noted in the attachment regarding the ongoing priorities and the work that's currently underway is environmental sustainability. This is a key portion of the general plan update. We are required to address greenhouse gas emissions and our plan to reduce those. So that will be part of the analysis. We need to get through the land use alternative portion first, and then we'll turn our attention to goals and policies regarding sustainability, mobility, and other issues that are of importance to the town. But it is part of the work plan for the general plan update. Council made proactive moves in December regarding Green Monday. And then we are, as I mentioned, required to analyze greenhouse gas emissions as part of the environmental impact report for the general plan. So we do need to identify specific policies and action items to reduce our carbon footprint. So it's already in progress. Maybe we could use better words so people know that we're addressing a climate emergency. So point well taken that perhaps it's not conveying the urgency that the community or the council might be interested in.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I have two follow-up questions. Well, just generally, I guess, to Ms. Privetti or Mr. Morley. Councilwoman Sayoc was asking about various traffic calming, et cetera, and I wanted to just make sure that what I understood was that in having transportation as a priority, and Mr. Andrews, maybe you can put up the sheet again, because we'll be using it, that, as I said at the outset, that what we're doing is looking at big ideas for priorities, and I would imagine that those have elements. So if we identify transportation, et cetera, as an element, that potentially traffic calming measures, capital improvements that go with that would come under the budgeting items for that identified priority. Is that how you envision it working?
Absolutely. We bring forward projects through our capital program to you on an annual basis. We program them out with our capacity to deliver over a number of years. And you have a lot of programs in the capital program, a lot of projects in the capital program now around safety, traffic calming, our project on Shannon Road, a project on Kennedy. We recently brought you a Winchester Complete Streets project. We have a Highway 17 ped overcrossing, a creek connector at Highway 9. Lots of projects that we're working on that are in the realm of safety and transportation. So we're continually looking to make improvements in the town in that area for sure.
So as long as we continue with that as a priority, these kind of projects would come forward for our consideration.
Yeah, we'll have them on the list for consideration through the capital program. We don't have unlimited funds there, so there's even a prioritization that goes on at that point as well.
Okay, and then my second question, I guess, from Ms. Pravetti, going to Mr. Rennie's question, and to comments from some of the speakers, our general plan update, you mentioned that we're going to have to update our housing element, which if any of you have worked on it or been involved, you know that that's quite complicated and requires state approval. So things like, with our general plan generally, sustainability is going to be an element, or environmental concerns will be an element of our general plan. We'll be discussing that. Our housing we're going to have to update, so I would imagine that, for example, the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, and I am with Ms. Sayak that that's woefully out of date. We can't be operating on a plan that's, what now, 25 years old? Could come under or be encompassed in that general plan update process, as well as necessary changes to zoning codes?
That's correct. As we work through the goals and policies to meet our objectives with respect to how we move all modes of traffic in and around the town, how we address environmental sustainability, as well as the reduction of greenhouse gas, we imagine that there will be a list of action items that the council would ultimately adopt as part of the general plan update. So if you see value in doing a separate climate action plan, that could be a separate item. I think given our past experience with having disparate plans and hundreds of action items, we want to make sure that we're realistic in terms of being able to deliver on action items that are going to move the needle for our town, but that will be a discussion as part of the general plan update. Certainly implementing zoning district changes to align with the new general plan has to occur. We have to be consistent between our general plan and zoning code. So there's still a fair amount of work to be done even after the end of 2020 so that we continue to implement our general plan.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, so to let the council know the way that I would like to organize this, and obviously I'm not a dictator up here, but I'm hoping to structure our discussion much following the staff report, which is asking us to basically affirm our existing priorities, identify whether new priorities should be added, consider those that are suggested by the staff, then identify any that council people would like to be added, and then move on to the ordinances. So maybe if we could begin with just a discussion of whether there is any disagreement or whether there is consensus on affirming those existing priorities that we have up on the board. Mr. Rennie.
So I'd say generally I couldn't find anything I didn't want on that list. I definitely want us to continue with the parking study, and it has under its short, medium, long-term action, so I think that's already covered. In the safety area, we've got fire protection and a couple sort of, I feel like, thin bullets. It doesn't really cover all that we're doing. I would think maybe we'd want to implement Annex 9, which is a much bigger effort that covers a lot of the things Mr. Stump was talking about. Maybe there's some other wording to go with it that allows us to just broadly go much further into fire protection. I think that's all the comments on the current list.
Okay, other comments on our existing priorities? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I guess I will be responding to your request sort of obliquely. There is nothing that anybody has said or that is on this list that is a bad thing or an objectionable thing. These are all good mandates. These are all good goals. The issue is, what can you do within the next year, within the next 2 years? What do you have people power for? What do you have funding for? So that's the view I took to looking at this list. And I would personally rise to the top, and maybe it's the way it's written or whether it's given bold letters, I don't know. But the top ones would be wildfire protection and pension payments. And with regard to the pension payments, I realize that we do have to make pension payments, but I'm talking about payments above and beyond the interest-heavy mandatory payments that CalPERS requires. This is on the list, but I would definitely support and continue to support, not that we have any choice, the state requirements with regard to RENA. I would like the town to continue to give input to, and then, of course, comply with. VMT, we're going to be moving forward, educating ourselves and then implementing. And with regard to housing, give input to and then implement anything that is required of us. And again, these are going to be all state mandates. With regards, or I'm not supposed to do the codes yet, so Mr. Schultz's codes.
Don't do the codes yet.
Okay, I'll move that from my list there. We should continue definitely forward with selling or leasing our town property. Continue forward as we have to with our general plan update. And I realize that if you work on the general plan, you realize how broad the issues are with which we are and will be dealing. So a lot of the things that have come up here at the dais and in the public will be addressed in our general plan. I believe that this would be probably the only thing on my priority list that is not on a prior one. The town should come up with a better way of sending out notice to all of its residents. We are missing a lot of them, and we should not be. With regard to modification, two things I would modify. With regard to the parking study, I believe that staff said and the council said that we need to prioritize and focus. That is a huge study, and it has a lot of things that need to be or could be done. With regard to the parking study, I would prioritize, and my personal priority would be to implement permit parking for the employees. And with regard to that, I would focus on employee parking in the less used town parking lots, probably on the north side of town. And on the quality of life, economic vitality, this year I would have us focus on our work with the PBID and also the, focus on the PBID, because if we focus on the PBID and the town's involvement in and implementation of the PBID, then we would be doing a lot of the things that were more detailed on that list and with the public, and that we will also, as part of our finances, we would be looking at our use of the reserve and how we would be using that for the town. other than my questions for the future and Mr. Schultz's ordinances, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Mr. Rennie, sorry, Ms. Sayak, because Ms. Spector talked about things that weren't on the ongoing priorities, did you have input on the suggested new priorities?
Not really. I have a couple ordinance suggestions.
Okay, let's wait on the ordinance.
Yeah, and I wouldn't limit the parking to just the employee. I think the wayfinding, and there were several other things in there. I definitely don't want to just limit it to. I agree, dealing with permit parking for employees, but I think you have to implement some of the others ideas in that to make that work also. I would, it doesn't really fit on the priority, but the comments about. I'd add in the comments about allowing the citizens on our current finance committee to vote. I'm okay with that. I'm not sure why that's such a big deal to let them do that. It's just an advisory committee that, votes and sends, advice to the council. So I'm failing to understand why that's important, and maybe that's a discussion for a different meeting. I'm unsure, but since it came up, I'd mention that. I'm mentioning that.
I think that could be a discussion for a different meeting, but it's certainly encompassed under the prudent financial management bullet, potentially. Ms. Sayak.
Okay, thank
So
you.
this gets to be ongoing and suggested new by the staff.
Thank you. So a couple of things. One I'm learning is perception is everything among our public. And so the idea that safety, even though it's not meant to be prioritized, I don't want anyone to think that this is not top of mind for the town. And so if it's simply moving the order of it, so safety's on top, I would be in favor of that. Because I do agree that that's something that we need, that we continuously look at. And I know that that's something that town staff is looking at, whether or not we need increased resources in that area. So moving to traffic and transportation, all those that are there, I'm supportive of. One thing I know Director Morley and his staff does a prioritization of their own when we do the capital improvement plan and any infrastructure suggestions that are come to us. But I just want to reemphasize that having safety as one of the priority metrics when suggesting improvements, I just want that affirmation and that reassurance when we go through the capital improvement plan that that's also top of mind when making those suggestions. So that concerns that we hear, whether it's Blossom Hill or Winchester, that we're looking at ways to address that with limited finances. Community of life. For me, this encompasses so much more than the bullets that we have here. In many ways, I think, again, the public perception of environmental sustainability not as strong a priority. Without environmental stability, our quality of life is going to decrease. And so if there's opportunities to look at ways to broaden that so that we're not limited to just what's under the General Plan 2040, what I envision for this upcoming 2 years, if there's opportunities and projects that we see that could really change the climate needle, then I think we should be able to do it. And just because it's not strictly prioritized on a list, but follows under that umbrella. And then financial management certainly is still a priority. The only thing I want to comment on is with the general plan, as we've all mentioned, it's going to take a significant amount of work this year and next to really bring the zoning changes and upcoming changes to increase density to meet what the state intends for us. I really want to emphasize, and I know it's a policy change, but we really have an opportunity to look at Los Gatos Boulevard plan. I keep bringing that back. And the reason I bring that forward is not only is it a zoning change, but there's also opportunity to do community enhancement that we talk about that's outside of our downtown business. We know North 40 is coming online. Is there opportunities to really provide more vitalization, more community events on Los Gatos Boulevard to connect all parts to downtown? And if we had an opportunity to redo this boulevard plan, to look at things beyond designs and standards, I'd really like to focus on that this upcoming year. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I guess I will weigh in. I am fine with our ongoing priorities. I agree with Ms. Sayak that labeling is important. So while I believe that environmental sustainability and climate action is contained under a lot of those existing bullets, to the extent that we call them out, I think might be helpful. So as people look at our website or look at what the town actually values, which is what this reflects, to the extent that we say that, whereas we may be well aware of it, but to the extent that we say it would be, I think, a good thing. I am definitely in favor of the newly suggested priorities, particularly our continuing involvement with RENA and the negotiations, if you will, on what the criteria are going to be for our numbers and how that goes with the housing element, which is, of course, part of our general plan update. Everything is part of our general plan update. Monitoring regional transportation is fine with me. I don't want to particularly get super involved with it, but paying attention to it obviously makes sense. And we're clearly going to have to be updating our ordinances to comply with new and different state laws. The change that I would make, I absolutely agree with Councilwoman Sayak with respect to Los Gatos Boulevard plan. And the reason I do is that I remember working on that plan a billion years ago. And it's outdated and it's guided decision-making on that, which we constantly have to make exceptions about. So for my money, it encompasses a lot of things that are on our priorities already: safety, transportation, complete streets, housing potentially environmental, because we could plan for multimodal transportation, bike and ped. There's lots of things that we can put into that plan. Right now, it's basically a design document. And with respect to what it could be, I recognize that it's going to be part of the general plan update, but it's a real opportunity as we go forward to consider. We have plans for specific areas. We have a downtown, we have a commercial, we have residential, and that one's just been sitting out there, to my mind, almost being a problem, if you will, for people that want to come forward with different ideas. So I would love to see us do some work on it, would be the change that I would make. And do you have the input you need then on the ongoing and, in just a second, Mr. Rennie, the ongoing and the anticipated new?
We do, thank you. I just want to make sure that staff understands the notion of adding the Los Gatos Boulevard plan most likely to the quality of life category. We will not have staff capacity to work on that in 2020. It can be a high priority as an action item coming after the general plan is updated for the reasons that you spoke of, how it addresses multiple priorities, but I just don't see us being able to manage a consultant and start working on that until we have better direction from the town in terms of what the overall vision is for Los Gatos Boulevard. But we're happy to add it, just as we'll add the housing element as a subsequent activity.
So that's fine, and I understand that. And again, for my mind, it's a bullet that would go under various things. What I particularly don't want to happen is that as the general plan update committee goes forward, or as we consider RENA questions or transportation questions, that the 25-year-old Los Gatos Boulevard plan gets held up as an obstacle to that, is my concern. Mr. Rennie, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Since we're bringing up the Los Gatos Boulevard plan, it reminded me about, if I can get the name right, our Visona light rail elements of the general plan. I think that's what it is, and I'm waiting for discussion on that to come with our general plan, but as long as we're talking about plans, that I think that's something that, as I said, I'm hoping that we have a discussion about, because if we've got to somehow plan for 2,000 units, wouldn't putting it near, hopefully, future transit and getting the transit to come to our town is going to require denser housing. So in my mind, a discussion on changing density in it related to the Vasona light rail so that where we put our housing is more transit-oriented development, and we induce the transit to actually come. With our current density there, and when Campbell decided to not go ahead with their Dell Avenue plan, there's no way that you can justify the millions of dollars, $100 million, to bring that to Los Gatos. And I keep thinking, well, we'd like to bring it to Los Gatos, but we need to do something to help that along. We've got another problem of where do we do with all this housing? We need to redo some zoning. We need to think about densifying some places. In my mind, that's potentially a piece of the puzzle. So I just wanted to mention that as long as we're talking about plans.
Ms. Spector?
Thank you. Following up on some of the things that were just set up here, I agree with Mr. Rennie. It would be, as someone who has been on the Finance Committee, it would be a lot more smooth if all 5 of the committee members could vote, rather than having everybody discuss it and then only 2 people vote. So I don't know if there is a legal impediment, but if there is not, I think it would work much better on all kinds of levels. With regard to the Boulevard, Los Gatos Boulevard plan, it has been so long since we adopted that, and it is so antiquated, that as the General Plan Advisory Committee works on land use and has been looking at the boulevard, I sort of knew in the back of my head that what we were talking about would be inconsistent, but sort of ignoring it like we have been for 20, 25 years. So obviously, we're going to need to do something with it sometime. But right now, it doesn't seem to be stopping anybody from doing what it is they want to do.
A vote of confidence for our policies right there. You have what you need then on the ongoing and suggested. So let's move on to ordinances. Thank you for your patience with me. Attachment 4 has suggested actual priorities of ordinances that we should consider. And I don't know if we have any kind of visual aid for the people to look at, but fire prevention is number 1. So let me just invite members of the council. We've got Mr. Schultz. How many? There are 17 total suggested in order of priority. So let me invite the council to discuss anything that they would like moved up, taken off, or otherwise altered about what's suggested to us. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. And my response may or may not segue with your question, but my input on these potential ordinances is that we should obviously do all of the ones that are mandated by state and federal law, and that includes a lot of these. And if the legal department has bandwidth above and beyond that, and if we're looking at local ordinances, my vote would be for those that deal with safety, and the 2 that I came up with were was the drone ordinance and the shared mobility vehicle or devices.
Okay, so just to clarify your comments, would you move those, the drone and the shared mobility, which is 11 and 12, up in the order?
I would put them after federal and state laws.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go down the line. Mr. Rennie?
Okay. I really didn't think much about what we moved them around, but I had three new ones that aren't on the list. The policy about the tree ordinance, it's not on the list, I don't think. That definitely sounds like it needs, excuse me, some reconsideration for the fines portion of that. It seems like it's maybe not that difficult, so maybe it can be further up on the list and not further down on the list. It seems like a pretty bad deal what happened to the trees there. I can't understand why we let that happen. Another one that I've been thinking that we ought to consider is banning plastic straws in town. Those straws easily get out to the ocean and out to the big plastic dump in the middle of the ocean. I noticed that we have quite a few businesses in town that are now giving out paper straws. Willow Street, for example. I think the difficulty may be places like Jamba Juice that give the big plastic straws, but I think there's enough alternatives that might be something to consider if other council members are willing to apply staff time to research it a little bit. And then one that I'm just going to mention it, but I'm not going to put it on the list at this time. Is we have, I would say, 2 absentee, more or less absentee commercial landlords that are leaving their business storefronts open for long periods of time. We could, at some point, put an ordinance in place that starts to fine them if it's open for too long a period in the downtown area. I think with the P-bid coming, we may attract these absentee landlords' attention, and maybe they'll start filling their stores. But I think it hurts everybody, all the landlords that are doing their job of creating, a vibrant business district, when there's some that leave. There's some stores that have been open for 2, 3, 4 years now. That's getting to be ridiculous. The landlord should get with it. I'm not suggesting you quickly start finding them, but if something's been open a year, maybe, and nothing's in the works, year and a half, but it's something we should consider probably in the future. Let's see what happens with a P-bid.
Councilwoman Sayak.
So I'm in agreement with the tree, whatever tweaks are necessary for the tree protection. Mr. Schultz, you mentioned that there's something that's already in the works, so I'm wondering if it would take much staff, but I defer to you guys.
We can look at it. That's coming
Okay.
to you next Tuesday, so it would have to be
Oh,
a
it's
very
very
strategic
much in the
strike, and I don't know
works.
if we can get to
Okay.
it. But if not, we'll place it on the ordinance list as a separate standalone if we can't incorporate it within.
Sounds good. And then the only thing I would add, I'm curious, for some reason I thought, didn't the state ban plastic straws? Or do we have to do something supplemental?
The state requires businesses to ask customers if they want a straw as opposed to just automatically providing it. This was important to our disabled community that rely on straws for accessing their beverages. So it would be the will of the council if you wanted to do something stronger than state law.
Okay. See, this is where I'd love to be able, just because understanding we're limited in resources, I'd love to be able to have a plan that looks at what really gets the most bang for the buck in terms of our climate and sustainability goals. So I would be in support, but also I know that there's all these other competing interests. So I would put that on the list, but I defer to staff to see whether or not there's bandwidth to continue with that. And I think the other question that was asked was the Finance Committee, and my understanding is that's just a policy, right? That's not an ordinance?
So my
For voting?
suggestion, if there is a majority that would like to, that I would bring that back as an actual ordinance that you would pass. Since there is an initiative that will put it in our zoning code, I think it's a good idea to see if you'd want to work on an alternative so that potentially maybe the proponents of that would not want to go forward with it and save the town money. Or if not, then you could decide whether you wanted it competing or just to wait to see what happened. So it seems like there's a majority, so I will put that on the list and probably bring that forward to you in the spring.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing else? Okay. I'm in favor of waiting to see what happens with the ballot measure rather than the town using its limited bandwidth on the question of the Finance Committee, Commission, et cetera. If the town wants to go forward and change the resolution that's existing, that's a different question. But actually working on an ordinance, I would not be in favor of that, given that we have 17 on our list already. I am sort of fine with the order that's indicated in our attachment. I I understand that we're getting a fire prevention next week. So that's number one, great. I agree with the Vice Mayor that I'd like to see our state-required ordinances come first rather than discretionary ordinances. Some of them I would imagine would be pretty straightforward. For example, the accessory dwelling unit, I would imagine that we could do that pretty quickly just to conform our existing ordinance. Rather than, and then I'm also interested in doing our below market price ordinance sooner rather than later, because I think that's going to inform our voice in the RENA process, and I'd like to get in front of that. I would move shared mobility way up. So after I finished with the below market price, I'd go to that. If we're speaking about environmental action, multimodal transportation, et cetera, that's another one that the town, I think, should get in front of, rather than have these things appear without anything in place. Beyond that, I'm fine with the other suggestions. Anything else from council?
I would point out that although it's not on my list and it hasn't even been brought up, is that we would have the T-bid ordinance, so that would also be one that I've got to add to it that I just completely left off the list. So they do come up from time to time during the year. For example, last year, construction hours was nowhere on the list, and there were 2 or 3 other, the Bs, when we had to come back and change the B ordinance. So they do come up during the year. But this gives me, I think I'm hearing to move the drone and the mobility up to about the 5 or 6 slot. The T-bid would be fit in there. The Finance Commission would be put in there, and the tree ordinance are the changes I see right now that council is in favor of.
Ms. Spector.
Thank you. Along that line, a couple questions and then maybe a suggestion. With regard to the tree ordinance violations, is this something that Mr. Schultz can come directly from you to the council? Or, I mean, how can we do it the most quickly? We send it to the Planning Commission and then it comes here, or you send it directly,
It's in Chapter 29, which is our zoning code, so it would have to go to Planning Commission first.
Well, how can we best expedite that?
Just doing it as quickly as possible. There is no way to expedite it. We'll do it. It is not a very difficult ordinance. It's just adding sections regarding enforcement. Some of our codes have those specific sections. The dangerous dog has it that we just did. The more current ones now, we're making certain they have their own enforcement section. So it's not a long process. I think we could probably get it to council by the springtime.
All right, well, that would be a good addition along with the increased fees, because I agree, the testimony that from the 2 people who spoke, or maybe it was 3, was very powerful. And then a question probably for Ms. Pravetti. We had input from the public with regard to how can you do all of the things on the list. You have to look at your finances. With regard to that issue, is this something that we would be looking at our next meeting or at our meeting in May? So when should we be giving input as to what, for example, I would like to look at when the financial aspect of our priorities comes forward?
Thank you for the question. Next week would be a great time to start providing budget direction as we start considering capital projects and other priorities. We do have somewhat of a surplus, so there's the opportunity for council to reallocate to the reserves as we discussed in December. And then if there's any specific direction on capital improvements, I know our commissions and staff would appreciate that.
All right, that's helpful. With that in mind, when staff comes forward with money information, the funding that we get from, or have started to get from Wayfair, would be of interest to me. The funding that we're getting from Measure G would be of interest to me. And also the issue that was raised by Mr. Keon that was looking at revenue versus expenses. Does staff agree with him? Is he wrong? Input on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, I'm going to adjourn our meeting, and thank you very much, staff. Thank you very much, council, and those of you who attended tonight for a very productive meeting. Thank you very much.